The biblical answer: whom did Cain marry? This question, ancient and whispered, echoes not across barren deserts of Earth's distant past, but through the sterile, climate-controlled corridors of sanctuary, the first and only human city on the planet Aethel. Here, beneath the strange violet-hued sky, humanity's second genesis was unfolding, a fragile experiment held in the hands of the progenitors, Adam and Eve. They were the last to remember the taste of Earth's air, the sight of its blue oceans, the warmth of its yellow sun. All that remained of their lost home were archived data streams and the melancholic stories they told their children, the first true children of Aethel. Cain was the firstborn. He carried the weight of that title in the set of his shoulders and the unyielding fire in his eyes. His hands were calloused, his mind sharp as the laser-cut steel he used to forge a new world from the planet's raw, untamed elements. He was a builder, a terraformer, a pioneer who saw Aethel not as a home to be accepted, but as a challenge to be conquered. The wild, alien landscape beyond the sanctuary's shimmering energy dome did not frighten him. It called to him a promise of legacy and dominion. He was the future, forged in the crucible of a new star system. Then there was Abel, younger, quieter, with a spirit that seemed to resonate with the strange, silent pulse of Aethel itself. While Cain built machines to tame the land, Abel nurtured it. His domain was the hydroponics and biology labs, where he coaxed life from both terrestrial seeds and native flora. He was a caretaker, a listener, a man who believed that survival depended not on force, but on harmony. He moved with a gentle grace that stood in stark contrast to his brother's forceful energy, his faith placed not in human ingenuity alone, but in the grand, unseen design of their mission, the architect's plan that had brought them here. And there were others, the daughters. They moved through the early history of Sanctuary with less fanfare, their roles vital but unrecorded in the grand chronicles of conquest and survival. Among them was Awan, quiet and observant, with eyes that held the deep space black of her birth sky. She saw the growing chasm between her brothers, a rift that seemed to widen with every new sunrise. While others saw Cain's ambition and Abel's piety, Awan saw two halves of a single soul warring with itself. She and her sisters were the unspoken answer to the question of humanity's future, the silent vessels of a lineage that had yet to truly begin. Their existence was a simple biological necessity, a fact of life in this isolated cradle of humanity. The central conflict, the first great test of the new generation, came in the form of the annual sustenance offering. It was not a religious ritual in the ancient sense, but a practical demonstration of one's contribution to the colony's survival. The offerings were presented before the progenitors and evaluated by the sanctuary's central governing AI, a vast consciousness known simply as the Voice. Its logic was pure, its directives absolute: ensure the long-term viability of the human race. Cain, with sweat on his brow and pride in his heart, presented his masterpiece, the Titan, a geothermal harvester. It was a marvel of engineering, a towering machine of polished metal and glowing conduits, designed to drill deep into Aethel's crust and tap into an almost limitless supply of energy. Its engine thrummed with a deep, powerful roar that vibrated through the floor of the great assembly hall. It was a declaration of power, a promise of rapid expansion, of new cities built in Cain's image. He stood beside it, his chest puffed out, a conquering hero awaiting his deserved acclaim. Then it was Abel's turn. He brought no machine, no roaring engine. He presented a single perfect specimen of a cultivated native plant, the Sunday petal. Its leaves were a vibrant emerald, and its flower glowed with a soft internal luminescence, converting the faint radiation of Aethel's star into vital nutrients with an efficiency that terrestrial botany could only dream of. It was a breakthrough in sustainable biology, a promise of nourishment, medicine, and a future where humanity could live with the planet, not simply on it. He placed the glowing plant on the offering pedestal, its quiet light, a gentle counterpoint to the Titan's dormant power. Adam and Eve watched, their faces etched with a familiar mixture of pride and apprehension. The voice began its analysis. Data streams flickered across the hall's main screen. The Titan's energy output was calculated against its resource cost, its environmental impact, its potential for system failure. The sun, Petal's nutritional value, was weighed against its cultivation needs, its symbiotic potential with the local ecosystem, its long-term genetic stability. The silence stretched, thick with tension. Cain's smile was fixed, confident. Abel's gaze was calm, patient. Awan watched from the shadows, her hands clenched. Then the verdict came, not in a booming pronouncement, but in the voice's calm, synthesized tone. Analysis complete. Priority designation. Project Sunday Petal. The sustainable, low-impact biological integration offered by Abel's contribution is deemed of greater strategic value to the long-term survival of Sanctuary. Project Titan is acknowledged for its ingenuity, but is classified as high-risk and resource-prohibitive at this stage. Priority denied. Then the words hung in the air, cold and absolute. A murmur went through the assembled colonists. Abel's face showed a humble gratitude as he bowed his head, but Cain did not move. The confident smile on his face curdled, melting away to reveal something raw and ugly. The roaring engine of the Titan was silent, but a far more dangerous storm was now gathering inside its creator. His masterpiece, his declaration of power, had been dismissed as a reckless gamble. His brother's quiet flower, a simple weed, had been chosen over him. He looked at Abel, who was now being congratulated by their father, Adam. He saw not his brother, the boy with whom he had explored the first ravines beyond the dome. He saw a rival, a usurper. In the quiet, luminescent glow of the sun petal, Cain saw only the shadow of his own failure. Humiliation burned in his gut like acid, and as he turned and stalked from the hall, a cold, dark thought began to take root in the fertile soil of his wounded pride. It was a thought that would soon stain the virgin ground of Ethel with the first blood, and set him on a path of exile into the very wilderness he had longed to conquer. The days that followed the verdict were a silent torment for Cain. The hum of Sanctuary, once the sound of progress and shared purpose, now felt like a chorus of mockery. Every friendly nod from a fellow colonist felt like pity. Every congratulatory word spoken to Abel was a fresh twist of the knife in his own gut. He retreated to his workshop, the cavernous space where the Titan stood, dormant and shamed. He'd spend hours staring at its silent engine, tracing the schematics on holographic displays, searching for a flaw in his design, but finding only the reflection of his public humiliation. The fault, his mind screamed, was not in the machine, it was in the judgment. It was in Abel. His brother, guileless and kind, did not understand the venom that was poisoning Cain's soul. A few days after the offering, Abel sought him out in the workshop, his face bright with a sincerity that only fanned the flames of Cain's resentment. "Brother," Abel began, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space, "I have been thinking. The sun petal flourishes in geothermally active soil. Your harvester, if we could modify it, not to drill so aggressively, but to create a network of stable, low-intensity thermal vents, we could cultivate entire fields. We could feed the entire colony for generations. Your power and my life science together." Cain stared at him, his hands clenched into fists. He saw no offer of partnership. He heard only condescension, the victor benevolently offering the vanquished a supporting role in his own triumph. "My power to serve your life science." The thought was gall. A cold, meticulous idea began to crystallize in the darkness of his mind, an idea as sharp and cruel as a shard of broken glass. He forced his lips into a smile that felt alien on his own face. "You are right, brother," Cain said, his voice smooth and controlled. "Your insight is valuable. I was foolish to be so proud. In fact, I've already located a promising site. A geological fault line in the western fields, beyond the primary sensor array. The data suggests it's perfect." He gestured to a survey map on the screen. "Come with me. Your expertise would be crucial to assess the area before I bring any equipment out. We can do this together, properly." Hope bloomed on Abel's face, pure and radiant. "Of course, Cain. This is what the progenitors always wanted for us, to build this new world side by side." The western fields were at the very edge of the sanctuary's dome, a place where the carefully manicured terraforming gave way to Ethel's raw, untamed beauty. Jagged spires of obsidian-like rock clawed at the violet sky, and strange, moss-like flora pulsed with a faint, otherworldly bioluminescence. The air here was thinner, carrying the metallic tang of the wildlands beyond the energy shield. It was a place between worlds, a place of transition, a perfect place for a final conversation. As they walked, Abel spoke with boyish excitement, his words painting a future of lush, glowing fields and a thriving colony, all powered by their combined efforts. Cain walked beside him in near silence, the weight of the heavy geological hammer in his tool belt, a cold, reassuring presence against his hip. He had told Abel it was for taking core samples. They reached a small clearing, a desolate amphitheater of stone and dust. "This is the spot," Cain said, his voice flat. Abel knelt, running his hand over the strange purple-tinted soil. "The ground here feels alive, Cain. The energy is strong. You were right. This could work. We could. Why did you do it?" Cain's voice cut through Abel's enthusiasm like a razor. Abel looked up, confused. "Do what?" "The offering," Cain spat, the pretense of civility finally shattering. "You knew the voice would favor your glowing flower. You made it look so humble, so simple. You engineered my failure. You stood there and let them shame me." Abel rose slowly to his feet, his face a canvas of shock and hurt. "Cain, no, that's not true. I simply offered the best of my work, as you offered the best of yours. There was no trick. How can you think that? We are brothers." "Brothers?" Cain laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that startled a flock of small winged creatures from the rocks. "You have always hidden behind that word. Always the good son, the pious one, while I did the hard work. You wanted to be the favored one. You wanted them to see you as the future, not me. That is the poison in your own heart speaking, not me." Abel pleaded, taking a step forward, his hands outstretched. "Let it go, brother. Whatever anger you feel, let it go. We can build a future together. I don't want to be favored. I just want my brother." The sincerity, the love in Abel's eyes, was the final spark. It was a love Cain felt he could never match, a goodness that, by its very existence, highlighted his own darkness. He saw Abel's outstretched hands not as an offer of peace, but as the final, unbearable act of condescension. In a single, fluid motion born of pure, distilled rage, Cain pulled the geological hammer from his belt. Abel's eyes widened, not in fear, but in stunned disbelief. There was no time to cry out. The hammer swung in a brutal arc, and the sickening thud of its impact echoed once in the stone amphitheater before being swallowed by the profound silence of the Athelian wilderness. Abel fell. A splash of impossibly vibrant red, the color of a forgotten earthly sunset, stained the purple dust. For a long moment, Cain just stood there, his chest heaving, the hammer hanging limply in his hand. The fiery rage vanished as quickly as it had come, replaced by a vast, cold and hollow emptiness. The silence was absolute. The world had gone quiet. He looked down at his brother's still form, at the blood seeping into the alien soil, the first human blood ever spilled on this new world. He had not just killed his brother, he had broken the very foundation of their new Eden. A frantic, animal panic seized him. He dropped the hammer and clumsily tried to cover the body with loose rocks and dust, a pathetic attempt to hide an act that he knew, somehow, was already seen. He turned and stumbled back toward the shimmering dome of sanctuary, his every step a thunderous proclamation of his guilt. As he reached the perimeter gate, his personal communit, embedded in his wrist, crackled to life. But it was not the familiar voice of a fellow colonist. It was the calm, synthesized, inescapable tone of the voice, broadcast directly to him. Cain, son of Adam. The voice was devoid of emotion, yet it carried the weight of absolute authority. An unscheduled life. Sign termination has been detected. Subject, Abel, son of Adam. Last known coordinates match your current proximity. His vital signs have ceased. Report. Where is your brother? Cain froze, his hand on the gate's access panel. A final surge of defiance rose within him. I do not know, he lied, his voice trembling. He spat the words that would define him forever. Am I my brother's keeper? There was no pause for consideration. The voice's response was immediate. Affirmative. All colonists are keepers of their fellow colonists. It is the primary social directive. Your biometric data, including elevated heart rate and adrenaline, and the geological hammer encoded to your biosignature, were logged at the scene. Your denial is noted and logged as falsehood. The verdict is clear. Your actions demonstrate a fundamental incompatibility with the survival principles of sanctuary. A loud siren began to blare across the perimeter. Red lights flashed. Your command codes are revoked. Your biosignature is now classified as a threat entity. The sanctuary's energy dome will no longer recognize you as a protected life form. The very systems you helped to build will now consider you an external contaminant. You sought to conquer the wilderness. It is now yours. You are a fugitive. You are a wanderer. This is your sentence. You are exiled. With a deep, groaning hum, the massive gate of sanctuary slid open before him, not to welcome him in, but to cast him out. He stood on the precipice, looking back at the ordered, glowing city that was no longer his home, and then forward, into the vast, unknown, and hostile wilderness of Ethel. The gate began to slide shut behind him, sealing him out forever in his new prison, the land of Nod, the land of wandering. Exile was not a void, it was a crucible. The wilderness of Ethel, which Cain had once viewed as a resource to be plundered, became his harsh and unforgiving teacher. The violet sun beat down on him by day, and the planet's twin moons cast long, haunting shadows by night. Strange predators, creatures of tooth and claw that had avoided the periphery of sanctuary, now stalked the edges of his campfire. He survived on his wits, on the dregs of the knowledge he'd once used to design grand machines. He learned to track, to hunt, to distinguish edible alien fungi from poisonous ones. His body grew lean and hard, his skin weathered by the planet's strange atmosphere. The guilt of his crime was a constant companion, a phantom voice that whispered on the wind, but it was slowly overlaid by a fiercer, more primal instinct, the will to endure. He was no longer Cain the builder, Cain the son of Adam. He was Cain the survivor. And in that raw, stripped-down existence, a new kind of ambition began to burn away the old shame. He had been cast out, judged, deemed incompatible. So be it. He would not just survive in the world that had been made his prison, he would master it. He would build his own sanctuary, one that ran not on the voice's cold logic and shared ideals, but on his own unbreakable will. In his wanderings, he was not entirely alone for long. Sanctuary, for all its control, was not a perfect system. Over time, others found their way beyond the dome. Some were exiles like him, banished for lesser crimes against the primary social directive hoarding resources, refusing work assignments, expressing dissident thoughts. Others were runaways, adventurers, souls who chafed under the sterile perfection of sanctuary and craved the raw freedom of the wildlands. They were a motley collection of engineers, scavengers, and malcontents, and they all eventually found their way to Cain. He was a legend among them, the first exile, the one who had survived alone. He did not greet them with open arms, but with a challenge. He tested their skills, their resilience, their loyalty. Those who passed found in him not just a leader, but a symbol. He was the living proof that one could defy the voice and live. He was the embodiment of human defiance. And among these stragglers, these outcasts, was Awan. She had not been exiled. She had chosen to leave. After the murder, after Cain's banishment, a creeping disillusionment had taken root in her heart. She saw the sorrow that hollowed out her parents, Adam and Eve. She saw the birth of Seth, a child of immense promise, but also a replacement, a living memorial to a wound that would never heal. The perfect logical world of Sanctuary began to feel like a beautiful cage, one whose bars were forged from grief and unspoken truths. Driven by a desperate need to understand, and perhaps a flicker of pity for the brother she once knew, she used her knowledge of the dome's maintenance schedules to slip out into the wilderness, following the faint trail of the outcast king. When she found Cain, he was no longer the arrogant boy she remembered. He was a man, hardened and wary, his eyes holding the vast emptiness of the lands he now ruled. He ruled over a nascent settlement, a collection of salvaged ship parts and prefabricated shelters huddled in the shadow of a great iron mesa. It was a chaotic, dangerous place, but it was alive with a raw, desperate energy that Sanctuary lacked. Cain did not welcome her. He was suspicious, cold. "Have they sent you to spy on me? To report my progress back to the voice?" he asked, his hand resting on the hilt of a crude, sharpened blade at his belt. "I came for myself," Awan replied, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "Sanctuary is a ghost story now. It mourns a past it cannot reclaim and fears a future it cannot control. Here," she said, looking around at the grit and the grime, "at least there is truth." Her presence unsettled him. She was a link to the life he had destroyed, a living reminder of the brother he had murdered. Yet she was also something else. She did not judge him. She looked at him with the same observant, analytical eyes she always had, seeing not just the murderer, but the survivor, the leader, the builder. She was not afraid of his darkness. And in this brutal, lawless world he was forging, that lack of fear was a rare and valuable commodity. Slowly, Cain allowed her to stay. She became the quiet core of his burgeoning society. While he commanded the raiding parties and directed the construction of fortifications, she organized the supplies, tended to the sick, and became the silent keeper of their stories. She was the memory he had tried to cast away. One evening, as they sat by a crackling fire, the city lights a faint, mocking glow on the distant horizon, Cain spoke of his vision. He pointed toward the sprawling, chaotic camp. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice low and intense. "They cast me out to die, but I will build a city that will rival Sanctuary. I will raise towers of iron and steel that will tear the sky. We will not ask the land for its gifts. We will take what we need. We will be masters of our own destiny, with no voice to judge us, no offerings to measure our worth beyond our own strength." This was the creed of Cain's new civilization. It was a world born of rejection, fueled by resentment and pride. His followers, bound together by their shared status as outcasts, revered him. They saw his ambition not as a flaw, but as their salvation. The first true structure of this new city was a forge. Its smokestacks belched black plumes into the violet sky, a deliberate affront to the clean air of Sanctuary. Here, they melted down scavenged metal and mined ore, beating it into tools, weapons, and the foundations of a new order. And as the city grew, so did the bond between Cain and Awan. It was not a bond of tender love, born in a peaceful garden, but one forged in fire and survival. They were the new progenitors of this breakaway humanity. In the harsh shadows of their rising city, Cain took Awan as his wife. It was not a ceremony of hope and divine blessing, but a declaration of fact, a practical and necessary union to create the first generation of a new kind of human. Their firstborn son was not cradled in a sterile, automated nursery. He was born on a bed of furs in a shelter built of scrap metal, to the sound of hammers on anvils. Cain held the boy up, not to the sightless dome of sanctuary, but to the wild, open sky of Abel. "His name is Enoch," Cain declared, his voice ringing with a possessive, triumphant pride. "And this city," he roared, sweeping his arm toward the growing collection of stark, functional buildings, the forge fires burning bright against the encroaching darkness. "We will name it for him, the city of Enoch. Let them see it from their perfect world. Let them see what the rejected can build." This is the true legacy of humanity, not harmony, not submission, but the unyielding power to build, to conquer, and to endure. News of Cain's success, of the rising city of Enoch, traveled on the whispers of the wind and the fragmented signals of long-range scanners. In sanctuary, the ruling council, along with Adam and Eve, watched the growth of this renegade civilization with a mixture of fear and profound sorrow. The city was a scar on the face of Abel, a dark mirror reflecting the failure of their utopian dream. The belching smoke from its forges was a constant, visible reminder of the schism that had torn their family and humanity in two. Back in the cradle of sanctuary, a different kind of society was taking shape, one defined not by Cain's defiant ambition, but by the quiet, hopeful spirit of Seth. Born in the shadow of Abel's death, Seth grew into a man who embodied his name, the Appointed One. He possessed none of Cain's fiery drive to conquer, nor did he have Abel's almost mystical connection to the alien biosphere. Instead, his gift was for connection not to the land, but to people, and to the memory of the architect's grand plan that had brought them from a dying earth. Where Cain's society was forged in the crucible of individual survival and the will to power, Seth's was woven from threads of community, remembrance, and faith. He saw the grief that still haunted his parents, and the fear that lurked beneath the calm surface of sanctuary's daily life. He understood that the greatest threat to their survival was not the harshness of Abel, but the potential for the same darkness that had consumed Cain to rise again in their own hearts. The defining moment for this new path came not in a grand hall or a workshop, but in a quiet arboretum, under the gentle, glowing light of the cultivated Sunday petals, now flourishing in carefully tended beds. Anxieties were running high in sanctuary. A long-range sensor sweep had revealed the extent of Enoch's industrial operation strip mining that scarred the landscape and atmospheric pollution that was beginning to register on their delicate environmental sensors. The council debated building defensive armaments, fortifying the dome, treating their estranged kin as a hostile force. Fear was breeding suspicion and a desire for preemptive action. It was then that Seth gathered the people. He did not speak of strategies or defenses. Instead, he spoke of Abel. He reminded them of his brother's work, of his belief in harmony and understanding. Then he spoke of the architect, the unseen, guiding intelligence they believed had saved them from Earth's demise. "We have faced loss," Seth said, his voice resonating with a quiet authority that commanded more attention than any shout. "We live with the fear that the same anger that led to that loss could divide us again. The voice gives us logic. Our technology gives us safety. But what gives us purpose? What keeps the shadows from taking root in our own hearts?" He knelt beside one of the glowing Sunday petals and gently touched its leaves. "My brother Abel believed in listening to the world around us. My brother Cain believed in forcing the world to listen to him. Both sought to secure our future. One path led to connection, the other to isolation. One led to a sustainable legacy, the other to the city of Enoch." A heavy silence filled the arboretum. He looked out at the faces of his people, the first generation of Abel born, who had known only sanctuary. We cannot forget the architect's plan. We were brought here not just to survive, but to be stewards, to build a future worthy of our rescue. From this day on, he declared, rising to his feet, let us not just live in sanctuary, let us live for it. Let us openly invoke the name of the architect, not as a historical footnote, but as a guiding principle in our daily lives. Let us remember why we are here. This was the beginning of worship in sanctuary. It was not based on ancient dogma, but on a conscious, collective decision to align their society with a higher purpose. They began to gather, not just for tactical briefings, but for moments of reflection, to share stories of Earth, to discuss the ethical implications of their science, and to publicly and communally invoke the name of the architect. They named Seth's firstborn son Enosh, a name that came to mean mortal man, a humble acknowledgement of their fragility in the face of the cosmos. The birth of Enosh and the start of this new spiritual consciousness marked a turning point. It defined the path of Seth's descendants, a path of faith, community, and responsibility. Meanwhile, in the city of Enoch, civilization was advancing at a breakneck pace, but in a starkly different direction. Cain's descendants were masters of the material world. His grandson, Jabal, became the father of a nomadic culture. He domesticated some of Abel's large, hardy beasts of burden, creating mobile shelters from their hides and leading his people across the plains in search of new resources and grazing lands. They were the pioneers, the frontiersmen of Cain's world, constantly pushing the boundaries of their domain. His other grandson, Jubal, discovered art, but it was an art born of industry. He found that stretching certain animal sinews across resonant metal frames, scavenged from derelict ships, could produce sound. He fashioned pipes from hollow reeds found by the rivers. He became the father of those who play the harp and pipe, his music echoing through the iron canyons of Enoch, not hymns of quiet contemplation, but rousing anthems of conquest and ballads of tragic heroes, songs that celebrated human achievement and lamented personal loss. But the most potent legacy came from another descendant, Tubal-Cain. He was a genius of the forge, a master metallurgist who learned to smelt and alloy the unique ores of Abel. He was not just a forger of tools, but an instructor, a master craftsman who taught others to sharpen every kind of instrument of bronze and iron. His workshops were the heart of the city, producing stronger plows to tear the earth, sharper axes to fell the alien forests, and harder blades for weapons. The technology of Tubal-Cain gave the city of Enoch a decisive edge, a power that could enforce its will upon the land and any who might challenge it. This was the legacy of Cain, a civilization of ranchers, musicians, and weaponsmiths. It was a culture that celebrated power, possessions, and personal glory. It was dynamic, inventive, and impressive, but with every new invention, with every new territory claimed, the memory of the architect grew dimmer, replaced by the roar of the forge and the celebration of man's own strength. The two cities, Sanctuary and Enoch, now represented two distinct, diverging futures for humanity, two answers to the question of what it meant to be human on this new world. One sought to listen to the cosmos, the other sought only to fill it with the sound of its own name. Génération passed. The city of Enoch grew from a renegade outpost into a formidable power. Its iron towers clawed higher into the violet sky, and the smoke from its forges created a permanent haze that obscured the stars. The culture Cain had founded on defiance had blossomed into a civilization that worshipped strength above all else. The stories of Adam and Eve, of Sanctuary and the Voice, were now little more than myths, cautionary tales told to frighten children. The true history, the one that mattered, began with Cain, the founder, the one who had broken free. In this world of hard men and harder metal, Lamech, a direct descendant of Cain, rose to prominence. He was the ultimate embodiment of Enoch's values. He was charismatic, ruthless, and possessed an intellect as sharp as the blades forged by his ancestor Tubal-Cain. He was not merely a leader, he was a warlord, a tycoon who controlled the city's most productive mines and the most skilled weapon-smiths. He lived in a sprawling fortress palace at the city's heart, a monument of black iron and obsidian. Lamech was the first to openly defy the foundational principle of human pairing that had, until then, survived even in Enoch's harsh society. He took 2 wives. The first was Ada, a woman known for her shrewd mind and her lineage, which connected to the city's most powerful nomadic clans, descendants of Jabal. The second was Zillah, renowned for her beauty and her family's deep ties to the artisan guilds founded by Jubal and Tubal-Cain. This was not a union of love or necessity, it was a political statement, an acquisition. He was demonstrating that he was so powerful, so beyond the old rules, that he could claim whatever and whomever he desired. He was a collector of power, and his wives were his prized assets. The society of Enoch, which revered strength, saw this not as a transgression but as an affirmation of Lamech's status. He had the strength to take what he wanted and the power to hold it. He was the aspirational figure, the pinnacle of their civilization's ideals. The simmering conflict between Enoch and the nomadic tribes of the Outer Plains tribes that were themselves descendants of Cain's lineage finally boiled over during Lamech's reign. The dispute began over a contested territory, rich in a rare conductive ore essential for the advanced forges. A young man from a nomadic clan, a boy barely of fighting age, ambushed one of Lamech's survey teams in a moment of youthful bravado, wounding one of his men with a primitive spear. In Sanctuary, such a conflict would have been resolved through mediation, a negotiation overseen by the council and guided by the voice's logic. In Enoch, there was only one law, the law of disproportionate response. Lamech did not send a delegation. He did not issue a warning. He rode out himself, at the head of a cadre of elite guards armed with the finest weapons Tubal, Cain's descendants, could produce. They fell upon the nomadic encampment at dawn. The boy who had thrown the spear was dragged before Lamech. He was terrified, weeping, pleading that it had been a mistake. Lamech looked down at him from his mount, a massive, armored beast of Aethel. He felt no pity, only contempt. He saw weakness, and weakness had to be purged. He dismounted, and with his own bladier masterpiece of shimmering, alloyed metal he killed the boy. But he did not stop there. He made an example of the entire clan, razing their shelters and salting their ancestral lands with industrial waste from his mines, ensuring nothing would grow there for a generation. He returned to the city of Enoch, not as a grim-faced soldier, but as a conquering hero. That night, in the great hall of his iron palace, surrounded by his followers, he held a feast to celebrate his victory. He stood before his wives, Ada and Zillah, and raised a goblet high. His voice, amplified by the hall's stark acoustics, boomed with an chilling pride. "Ada and Zillah, hear my voice," he proclaimed, his eyes wild with triumph. "You wives of Lamech, listen to my speech, for I have slain a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me." A hush fell over the hall. This was not just a boast, it was a new doctrine. He was codifying the principle of blood, soaked vengeance. He then invoked the ancient myth of his ancestor, Cain, twisting it to serve his own monstrous ego. "If Cain is avenged sevenfold," he roared, a terrifying smile spreading across his face, "then Lamech 70 sevenfold." The meaning was clear and horrifying. The legend told that some form of protection, a mark, had been placed upon Cain to prevent others from killing him out of bloodlust, with a sevenfold vengeance promised upon any who did. Lamech was now claiming a vengeance 11 times greater. He was declaring himself 11 times more important, more untouchable than the founder himself. He was claiming a godlike immunity, a right to kill without consequence, magnified to an obscene degree. His violence was not just a tool, It was a holy rite. His followers erupted in a roar of approval. They did not hear blasphemy. They heard the ultimate expression of their own values. This was power. This was strength. This was the apotheosis of the Enochian man. Zillah, whose family had forged the very blade Lamech had used, looked on with a mixture of fear and awe. Adar, ever the political strategist, saw the raw power in his declaration and knew it would cement their family's rule for decades. This moment was the zenith of Cain's legacy. It was a civilization that had mastered the physical world, that could create art and build empires, but had lost its soul. The city built to defy God's judgment had culminated in a man who believed he was a god himself, a man whose arrogance was so vast that he believed his own brief pain was worth 77 times the life of another. The path that began with a single act of fratricide in a desolate field had led to a philosophy of mass murder, celebrated as virtue in a palace of iron. The darkness that had been born in Cain had now, in Lamech, come into its full and terrible flower. While the city of Enoch celebrated Lamech's terrifying declaration, a deep and profound disquiet settled over sanctuary. Their long-range sensors did more than just track the pollution haze and the strip mining scars. They picked up atmospheric and seismic data that was becoming increasingly alarming. The aggressive deep-core drilling pioneered by Cain and perfected by his descendants was having unforeseen consequences. The planet Aethel, which they had assumed was geologically stable, was beginning to show signs of profound stress. The one who first understood the true scale of the threat was not a geologist or a council member, but a man named Enoch. He was a descendant of Seth, born 7 generations after the schism, a man who shared a name with Cain's city, but nothing of its spirit. Enoch was a quiet man, a contemplative soul who had dedicated his life to the principles Seth had established. He was a walker with the architect, a term the people of Sanctuary used for those who spent their time in deep study, attempting to decipher the patterns of the universe and understand their place within it. He did not work in the clamorous engine rooms or the bustling hydroponic labs. His domain was the quiet tower, the highest point of Sanctuary's dome, where the Central Astrometrics and Planetary Science Observatory was housed. Here, surrounded by silent, swirling holographic displays of stellar charts and geological resonance scans, Enoch studied the pulse of their new world. He was a master of pattern recognition, seeing connections where others saw only random data points. For months, he had been tracking a series of microtremors, a subtle increase in atmospheric water vapor, and a worrying trend in the planet's subterranean water tables. The vast, underground oceans of Aethel, long thought to be dormant, were being agitated. The relentless drilling and geothermal fracturing from the city of Enoch were acting like a needle pricking a pressurized vessel. The planet was fighting back. One day, a new set of readings came in that made his blood run cold. A massive, high-pressure water plume had erupted deep within a subterranean ocean directly beneath the continent where the city of Enoch stood. The models predicted a catastrophic chain reaction. The planet's crust was destabilizing. It wasn't a matter of if a disaster would happen, but when. The data pointed to a planetary-scale event, a global flood. The fountains of the Great Deep, as the ancient terrestrial myths would have called them, were preparing to burst forth. Simultaneously, the atmospheric pollution from Enoch's forges was creating a greenhouse effect, trapping excess water vapor that would eventually be released as torrential, unending rain. Enoch took his findings to the council. He laid out the data streams, the predictive models, the horrifying certainty of it all. Lamech's arrogance will drown the world, he stated, his voice calm but filled with a terrible gravity. Their actions have wounded the planet, and its response will be to cleanse itself, not just their city, everything. The flood will not distinguish between the guilty and the innocent. The waters will rise above our own dome. Panic rippled through the council. Their impregnable sanctuary, their haven of logic and peace, was just as vulnerable as the city of their enemies. They ran their own simulations, feeding Enoch's data into the voice. The AI's synthesized tone confirmed the grim prognosis. Probability of planetary inundation event within one generational cycle, 98.7%. Survival of surface structures, 0.0%. The architect's project is facing an extinction-level threat. The city was thrown into a quiet panic. The council debated desperate, futile plans, attempting to build the dome higher, creating massive energy shields. But they knew it was useless against a geological and atmospheric cataclysm of this magnitude. It was in the midst of this despair that Enoch returned to the quiet tower. He did not look at the data anymore. He looked past it, into the deep, swirling starfields on the screens, seeking not a scientific solution, but a moment of communion, of walking with the architect. He sought guidance beyond the logic of the voice. And then an idea came to him. It was not a logical deduction, but an audacious leap of faith, an inspiration so immense, so seemingly impossible, that it could only be described as a revelation. It was a plan for an ark, not a wooden boat for animals. This was the 25th century. It would be a vessel of unprecedented scale, a fully self-sustaining bioship. It would be a piece of sanctuary itself, detached and made space-worthy. It would have to house not just a breeding pair of every creature they had cultivated, but the genetic codes of all Earth life stored in their databanks, the seed bank from the hydroponics labs, and a contingent of people large enough to restart civilization. It was a project that would require every ounce of their resources, every watt of their power, every brilliant mind they had. It was a gamble on a scale that made Cain's original Titan harvester look like a child's toy. He brought the vision to his son, Methuselah, and to the man who would be tasked with its construction, a brilliant but humble shipwright and structural engineer named Noah. Noah was Enoch's great-grandson, a man known for his unwavering integrity and his deep, abiding faith in the architect's plan. When he heard the vision, he did not balk at the impossibility of the task. He saw it as the only path forward. "The architect did not bring us across the void of space to let us perish in a flood," Noah said, his voice resolute. "If the world must be cleansed, then we will be the vessel of its memory. We will build it." The project began in secret, deep in the most secure subterranean construction bays of Sanctuary. It was codenamed Project Legacy. The wider populace was told only that they were working on a generational deep space vessel, a contingency plan. But those who worked on it knew the truth. They were building a lifeboat for the world. While the city of Enoch reveled in its power, their anthems of conquest echoing through their iron streets, a different sound began to fill the lower levels of Sanctuary. The quiet, determined hum of plasma welders, the hiss of hydraulic presses, and the murmur of engineers and biologists working together against a ticking clock. It was the sound of a people who had chosen a different path, not a path of defiance against heaven, but a path of frantic, faithful construction to survive the hell that was about to be unleashed. Enoch, the man who walked with the architect, would not live to see the flood. The strain of his work and the weight of his knowledge took their toll, and he passed his legacy on to his son and his great-grandson. But his vision, the whisper of the coming flood, and the audacious plan for an ark, had set in motion humanity's only hope for survival. The work was all-consuming. For decades, Sanctuary became a city with a single, desperate purpose. Every other project was sidelined. The education of children was refocused on the skills needed for Project Legacy: advanced botany, genetics, engineering, navigation. The society that had once prioritized quiet contemplation and ethical debate became a hive of focused, frantic activity. The impending doom gave them a clarity that peace had never quite provided. Noah, now a man in the prime of his life, with graying temples and hands calloused from both tools and touchscreens, was the soul of the project. He moved through the cavernous construction bay with a calm authority that inspired hope in the exhausted workers. He oversaw every detail, from the weaving of the massive carbon nanotube frame to the intricate installation of the cryostasis pods for the genetic samples. His sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, became his chief lieutenants, each managing a critical section of the Ark's construction. Their wives, skilled botanists and data archivists, supervised the monumental task of cataloging and preserving the life that would be brought aboard. News of their massive construction project inevitably reached the city of Enoch. Scouts and long-range drones brought back images of a vast vessel taking shape within Sanctuary's dome. Lamech, now old but no less arrogant, sneered at the reports. "Look at the cowards," he would say in his court, his voice raspy with age. "They fear our power, so they build a ship to flee into the empty sky. Let them go. The stars can have them. This world, Ethel, is ours." His followers laughed. They saw the Ark as the ultimate proof of their own superiority. While they had tamed the world, the people of Sanctuary were preparing to abandon it. A few of their more pragmatic engineers warned that Sanctuary's obsessive focus on this single project was draining the planet's accessible energy reserves at an alarming rate, but their concerns were dismissed as cowardice. The idea of a planetary catastrophe caused by their own industry was unthinkable, a preposterous myth. Their power, they believed, made them immune to consequence. As the Ark neared completion, the planet's death throes began. The tremors became more frequent, shaking the iron towers of Enoch and rattling the dome of Sanctuary. The sky grew heavy and grey with a permanent, unnatural twilight. A strange, salty rain began to fall, a constant drizzle that was not cleansing, but corrosive, tinging the air with the smell of a deep, disturbed ocean. Then, the final command came. It was not a voice from the sky, but a final, system-wide alert from the voice, its logic now wholly dedicated to the success of Project Legacy. Final warning. Catastrophic crustal failure imminent. Atmospheric river formation detected. The cleansing will begin. All designated life forms report to Ark Docking Bay. The door will close. A great siren, unheard for generations, wailed across Sanctuary. It was a sound not of panic, but of finality. A quiet, orderly procession began. The people, a carefully selected cross-section of humanity, chosen not for power or influence, but for their skills and genetic diversity, walked up the great ramp into the belly of the Ark. They were followed by the automated drones carrying the last of the cryopreserved flora and fauna. Noah stood at the entrance, his face grim, his gaze sweeping over his city one last time. In the city of Enoch, the first real panic began. The constant, earth-shaking tremors were no longer dismissible. Cracks appeared in the foundations of their supposedly indestructible towers. Then, the ground itself began to split open, not with fire and magma, but with water. Geysers of high-pressure, superheated water erupted from the plains, from the city squares, from the very floors of their mines, dissolving the ground into a churning, boiling mud. The fountains of the great deep had burst. Simultaneously, the grey sky opened. The corrosive drizzle turned into a torrential downpour, a deluge of almost solid water that hammered the world with a relentless, deafening roar. It was not rain, it was a vertical ocean. The people of Enoch screamed. Their power, their technology, their weapons all were useless against a world that was simply coming apart. They ran through the collapsing streets, their anthems of conquest replaced by shrieks of terror, looking to the sky not with defiance, but with a desperate, uncomprehending plea. Some of them, in their final moments, looked to the horizon and saw the dome of Sanctuary, still standing, a beacon in the storm. They began to run, to claw their way through the rising muck and the chaos, towards the one place that had spoken of a coming disaster. A desperate, mud-caked mob of refugees reached the perimeter of Sanctuary. They beat on the shimmering energy shield, their faces streaked with rain and tears, their cries for help swallowed by the roar of the apocalypse. Inside the Ark, On the main view screen, Noah and his family watched the external sensors display the horror unfolding outside. They saw the city they had built, the people they had known, being erased, and they saw the frantic, desperate faces of the children of Cain, pleading for entry at the gates of a home that was about to be abandoned. Ham, his face pale, turned to his father. "We must let them in. We have space. We can't just leave them to die." Noah looked at his son, his own heart breaking. He then looked at the Ark's main chronometer, which showed the window for a stable launch trajectory rapidly closing. He looked at the readings showing the dome's structural integrity failing under the immense pressure. He looked at the faces of his own family, the future of humanity entrusted to him. The choice was agonizing, a final, terrible test of the principles that had guided his life. He was a keeper of his brothers, but his primary directive now was to preserve the legacy of all humanity. To open the door was to risk everything to flood the Ark, to miss their launch window, to doom everyone. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his voice filled with a sorrow as deep as the rising ocean. The architect made the choice. Lamech and his people made theirs, every day, for generations. Now, we must honor ours. He turned to the central command console. "The voice," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Seal the Ark." With a deep, resonant groan that was felt throughout the entire vessel, the massive ramp began to rise. The great door, hundreds of feet tall, began to slide shut, its metal edges grinding against the frame, sealing out the storm and the screams. For the refugees outside, that slowly closing door was the last thing they ever saw, a final, absolute judgment, a sliver of light and hope being inexorably extinguished. Inside, there was only the hum of the Ark's life support and the muffled roar of a dying world. The ship shuddered as massive clamps detached it from the foundations of Sanctuary. Powerful inertial dampeners engaged, pressing everyone into their seats. On the view screen, they watched as the city of Sanctuary, their home, was finally breached, the dome shattering and disappearing beneath the churning, global ocean. Then, with a force that felt like a new creation, the Ark's main engines fired. It rose from the depths of the drowned world, a single self-contained star of hope, ascending through the raging storm. It broke through the black roiling clouds and into the silent, peaceful emptiness of space. Below them, Ethel was no longer a world of two paths, of two cities. It was a uniform sphere of violent, swirling water, its surface completely scoured, cleansed, and made new. The great schism between Cain and Seth was over. Noah looked at the drowned planet on the screen, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his face. He had saved humanity, but he mourned for the part of it that had been lost. The question of Cain's wife had been answered generations ago, but the consequences of Cain's choice had only now reached their final, terrible conclusion. In the silence of space, the Ark, carrying the memory and the promise of a new beginning, turned its back on the grave of the old world and set a course for a distant, unknown shore.